as I was preparing for this week, I have to agree with a couple of other folks. This particular topic made me squirm just a little bit, especially when the questions were asked of us and how it pertains to us as a church. And here are the things that I wanted to pull out because of the scripture really makes this hit home. A church without service dies like a tree that has neither roots nor fruit, without nourishment or purpose. We are called within Christian discipleship to stretch ourselves, to love those for whom it is not automatic, easy, common, or accepted. To those who do not think like us or live like us, and to express respect, compassion, and mercy for those we do not know, and who may never be able to repay us. This is the love that Christ pulls out of his disciples. Here we are. Week number 4, risk-taking mission and service. While I was working with the young folks here and I had them collect the items, I just had dumped them all in a pile and I made them separate the pile. You should have seen the excitement on their faces as they started to pull things together and figure out what went together and what didn't. And then the look on a couple of their faces when I said, now you guys have just done something for a little boy or a little girl who does not have any of this. Chase is the one that made the comment of, look at all of this. Now we can buy a lot more for a little kid. Mission and service, folk, allow us to move beyond who we are to something greater. It takes us into those places that might make us a little uncomfortable. Mission and service is the heartblood of the church. If people had not reached out in ancient times throughout to today to people beyond themselves to proclaim the gospel and to show the love of Jesus Christ, the church would never have grown. The church is not meant to be without purpose, and it is not meant to fail to bear fruit. Mission and service is the expression of the fruit that we are growing. In Ephesians 4:12, the pastors are called to equip the saints for the work of the ministry of the church. However, it doesn't say that the pastors are the only ones supposed to do the work of the ministry of the church. It says to equip the saints for the ministry. Now, who are the saints? What's that? You are. You folks are the saints of the church. In other words, we are in ministry together. Which brings me to my next thought. We are not in ministry to people, but we are in ministry with people. We are not called to just offer something. We are offering ourselves, but at the same time, a portion of who we are working with is offered back to us. Therefore, we are working together. The example that best fits this is for anyone who has ever been to a Habitat for Humanity project. Grant, I know that you have. You helped organize a number of them for this church. When we go to work on a Habitat for Humanity house, we are not doing the work alone, but the family that is going to live in that house is working beside us. It isn't a case that we are giving the work to someone, we are working with. Our lives are being touched in the same way that their lives are being touched, and together we are changed. Mission and ministry is that. Our gospel lesson this morning makes it even more clear that when the judgment comes, what we are going to be judged on isn't how many people do we have sitting in our pews. We're not going to be judged on how much money we gave. We're not going to be judged on any of that. We're going to be judged on what? Did you feed the hungry? Did you give drink to those who were thirsty? Water. A cup of water is how we like to describe it. Did you put clothes on the backs of those who were naked? Did you visit those who were sick? Did you visit those in prison? That's what it says in Matthew we will be judged on. Christ calls us to be in service. If you remember, he sent his disciples out to proclaim, to baptize, to heal. His own proclamation of ministry is, I have fulfilled the scripture that says, I have come to declare release to the captives, sight to the blind. Risk-taking mission and service calls us to go beyond ourselves and open ourselves up to the possibility of being hurt. It calls us to step beyond where we think we're capable. Growing up, my uncle and I, now you have to understand, my uncle is only 4 days older than I am. And we used to jump off of a cliff on my parents' farm when they had a farm up in northern Pennsylvania. We were 4, 5, 6 years old, and we would jump off this cliff. Now, how many of you have ever gone to do something you're not sure you're going to be able to do? You're a little bit frightened of it, get that knot in the bottom of your stomach or right about in here, and you're not sure, you start to shake, and you're feeling that excitement. You're ready to turn around to go away from it, and then you jump. Well, when we were in our 20s, we went back to my grandparents' farm, my uncle and I, and we decided to go find this cliff. We found it. It comes to my knee. Many times when we are afraid to take a risk, afterwards we realize that it really wasn't so big after all. Reaching out to touch someone who is different from us, reaching out to someone who doesn't think like us, or dress like us, or talk like us, look like us, can be a daunting, frightening task, but when we look back at the relationship that's been formed, the risk was not nearly as great as we might have thought. The risk to not have done it would have been far greater. Churches are called to offer opportunities for mission and service. It is through mission and service that our lives are changed. It is only when we are in service and mission to others that we come the closest to God. It is only when we are in service with others that we are the closest to God. So what is the opposite of being a risk-taking mission and service church? It means that we are safe, predictable, comfortable, certain, convenient, and fearful. Now, the one that I like to touch on the most is this. How many of you like to be comfortable? We like our lazy boy chairs. We like our remote control. We like to have our food prepared a certain way. We like our temperature in the house a certain level, right? We like our comfort. When we get comfortable enough, what usually happens? Fat and lazy. You fall asleep. Churches in much of the world that is known as Christendom have become comfortable. Too comfortable. And we have fallen asleep. We have managed to have enough of an influence on government in times past where laws were passed that met the needs and the ministries that the church used to have responsibility for. After all, once upon a time, whose responsibility was it to care for the widow and the orphan? Who was responsible for caring for the elderly? Who was responsible for caring for the hungry? Who was responsible for delivering clothes to the needy? Who was the one who ministered to those in the prisons? Who ministered to those in the hospitals that were sick? For just a moment, let's pause for a second. Orphanages were most often in this country started not by the government, but by churches. Hospitals, for the most part, were started by churches, food banks, caring ministries. Yet, as time went past, the government took over responsibilities for these. Why? Because the church had that influence on the government. But here's the issue, folks. As great as our government is, as great as other governments might be, are governments dictated more often on the principles of God or on the principles of greed? And as we get into that, what happens to the welfare of those that are supposed to be cared for? It sometimes gets lost. Church, we are still called as disciples of Jesus Christ, as followers of Jesus Christ, to be the ones caring for those who are in need. To open ourselves to the possibility that they won't repay us, they may ridicule us, they may want to throw us out, they may not want anything to do with us, and we are still called to serve. In one of my previous appointments, we began a discretionary fund, and out of that fund, there was a family that we assisted in the ability to go and see a family member that was in a hospital in Pittsburgh. It was an incredible gas card of $25. Out of that $25, there was an entire family that became an active part of that church, and it changed the dynamics of the church. As we reached more and more into the lives of those people in our community, there was more and more that we found we could do. There was more and more of an influence that we had on the lives of people. There were more and more lives changed, and the church grew. It is only when we are in mission and service that we show people who Jesus Christ is. So as followers of Jesus Christ, we cannot live as if suffering does not exist in the world and that it has nothing to do with us. Christ moves us closer to the people who are in need, not farther away. We cannot walk around the obvious suffering. We cannot ignore it. We cannot deny it. And we cannot act as though we are too high and mighty. We cannot act as though we are too busy. We cannot act as the first two people within the story of the Good Samaritan. That is not the church. The church practices risk-taking mission and service. The Samaritan had no idea who this man was, or what this man did, or whether this man would ever be able to repay him. Nothing. And he took him and cared for him personally, and then when it was time for him to go, he offered something that went beyond. We cannot moan about how somebody ought to do something about the evils in the world. We can't moan and groan and complain about the suffering that people have in the world. We can't moan and groan that they are hungry, thirsty, naked, sick, alone, lost people. We cannot merely lift them up in prayer, asking God to do for us what God created us to do for him. When we offer up in prayer, God, we want you to help feed the sick and clothe the hungry, his answer is this: I did give help. I created